professional, and advocate for military connected students in Alaska. His work bridges the gap between military life and academic success, particularly for students navigating transitions due to family deployment or relocations. I've got a long list of his academic contributions, his community and school work, and I'll skip through all the professional stuff and say he's a local guy. He resides right here in North Pole, Alaska, and has a long history of serving the community and his involvement across multiple states, including Arkansas, Hawaii, and California. Also joining us tonight is the special guest from Fairbanks North Star School District, Dr. Ellis Ott. His work focuses on educational data analysis, accountability, program evaluation to support student success across the district. He leads research and evaluation studies for district programs, coordinates state and federal compliance reporting, including assessments like PEAKS, Performance Evaluation for Alaska Schools, provides insights into student performance trends, and helps shape data-informed decisions for educators and administrators. He has a PhD in statistics and education from Iowa State University, a Master of Science in Statistics from Iowa State University, and a BS in Mathematics from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So he's kind of a local guy too. Dr. Ott plays a key role in interpreting standardized test results and developing early warning systems to identify students at risk. His work helps ensure that the district meets both state and federal education standards while striving for equity and excellence. So, Dr. Kincaid, I'm going to let you take the lead here and kind of introduce the follow-on discussion, and then lead into what we're going to have Dr. Ott talking about.
All right. So I want to talk about Impact Aid, and Impact Aid is federally funded education funding. It is basically, it was created back in the 50s, mainly for military bases or for community that actually educated military families. What it does is actually, it replaces taxes or partially replace taxes from the local community for educating military kids. So a more appropriate name for Impact Aid would be, instead of funding, it would be actually reimbursement, because it's literally reimbursing the local community for funding for educating military kids, or later on became for federally connected kids. So they include anybody from federal properties. And the main thing about Impact Aid is getting everyone's that eligible for Impact Aid are eligible to be submitted as Impact Aid connected. They have to be verified, right? So there's two ways to do that. One is a check source, which that would be the district checking with, for example, Housing Air Force Base or any federally connected entity, whether it be housing offices or almost any entity that's a federal entity. They would check and verify. So yes, we do have these individuals. They do have school. You do have kids in your school, and they would check it that way. Other way is through a survey, and you would send the surveys out to the families, and the family would say, yes, I have a kid in this school, and checking you send it back. And there's no right or wrong way to do that. You can do both of them, or you can do one of them. Both of them probably is more effective if you do them both. Currently, we do a lot of check source right now, and we're sure we're missing a lot of folks. Right, we don't know everybody we don't know everybody that's actually eligible, and when we do find out, then we got to get the people to sign off on the check source. If no one wants to sign off, or his families don't want to actually do the survey, then we don't get to claim those people. And it's very important because it becomes millions of dollars just laying aside that you can't get to because no one wants to actually supply for it. And it doesn't go into anybody's privacy. It's just, yeah, I have a kid, this is the kid, and yes, it's checking, that's it. District gets that, the district sends it up to D. D sends it to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. said these are verified, then they cut a check for you. And that's how it happens. When it gets there, after that, it gets back to the states, and that's when Dr. Ott comes in, and he can explain what happens to it once you get that money, once you get verified. when some money comes back to the state, how the money is actually dispersed. For regular citizens, it's concerning because, like I said before, it's not extra funding, additional funding that the federal government is giving you. It's reimbursement funding for you paying for kids on a military installation or federally connected kids. So that's what it is. Right. That's Impact Aid in a nutshell. It gets much more complicated than that, but that's it in a nutshell. Right. So when anybody say, hey, if a military person comes out, that's our money should go back to our base, the school on our base. That is not what Impact Aid does. So it's just reimbursed for the funds that the citizens are already paying for the schools on your base. That makes sense? All right. Let's go ahead.
Question, just to confirm, I guess. It isn't just military, it is federally connected. So if you're working for the federal government at the federal building downtown and the Parks building
Absolutely.
out on wherever that is.
Yes.
We should be tracking.
We should be tracking that, yes.
Okay.
Now let's the technician. You switch to camera 4 for a second. So in all my introductions, I did skip one of our other important guests, Mr. Representative 33 Mike Props, who is also with us in the studio tonight. And as you can see, we're roaring up to a highly rehearsed program for tonight. So everything is running like clockwork, and I'm batting on 2 of my 4 cylinders. So telling you back to the camera operator, back to camera 1.
Do we want to go ahead and open up the PowerPoint and I can go over Impact Aid?
Let's
in more
say it.
detail?
Let's say that
That'd be
anymore.
great.
Okay.
No, we'll let him finish
And
that.
then with that, whenever you're ready, Doctor, I'll just call for you what you need. You want to start your PowerPoint?
Yes, please. The one on Impact Aid.
Impact Aid, here we go.
So we'll get into the weeds a little bit here. So this is about Impact Aid. So as was stated, I'm the senior research analyst for the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District. But what is federal Impact Aid?
Doctor, I hold on
Oh,
one
sorry.
second. We've got another little minor technical issue that I need to overcome. And we need to,
Oh, right.
uh, think we should be ready. And at this time, I'm going to ask anybody in the Zoom audience who can hear me. Let me see if somebody can acknowledge that you can see the slide that says, "Do you know about Impact Aid?" And if so, raise your hand or let me know by chat or unmute your microphone and tell us you can see it. Anybody on Zoom who's watching, acknowledge that you can see and hear Dr. Ott. Teresa, I'll pick on you. Can you hear us, Teresa? We are having it's not a technical issue, it's an operator issue right now. And I don't know that our audience can actually hear us.
Hear, but they can't see.
Yeah, we can hear well. We just can't see the PowerPoint. We can see Dr. Ott
Okay,
and Dr.
Thank you.
Kincaid and Mr. Prox.
okay, thank you. Stay on there and help me as we struggle through this.
Yes, sir. Been there, done that. Understand how frustrating it is. So thank you for your persistence.
We've been here for 6 hours rehearsing this. So,
Oh, there we go. Now we can see the deck.
oh, good.
Let's go to present, and that should do it.
There we go.
How's that?
We're seeing the entire edit mode, so somewhere there should be a present button.
Up to the top right.
Okay, I know what we did. I'm gonna stop the share, just sharing the wrong screen, I think.
Yeah.
Stop the share. I'm gonna share again. And try to pick the right screen this time. This is the one we're gonna share.
Oh, beautiful. There it is.
There you go.
So now we're in full swing and we've overcome the user-induced error.
I'd just like to point out that
Yep.
John was born before 1965, and he still figured that out.
Dr. Proceed.
Okay, so impact aid, let's go to the next slide.
There we go.
So just keep going as I talk on. So impact aid is a federal program. And it is to assist school districts in relation to federal activity. And as Dr. Kincaid was saying, that has to do with lost property tax revenue due to federal properties. So the two major ones are Eielson Air Force Base and Fort Wainwright Army Base. Okay, this is where the government is paying their share of the cost to educate students enrolled in our school district. Essentially participating like community members do when they're paying property taxes on homes. And did you know that this impact aid law is part of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was the reauthorization of the No Child Left Behind Act? Next slide, please. So let's talk about federal activity. What do we mean by that? So our local borough cannot collect taxes on those federal properties, Fort Wainwright, Ben Eielson Air Force Base, right?
Good.
Yeah, just keep going. It'll yeah.
Then keyboard sticking.
And because of that, our borough is less capable of collecting property taxes and therefore supporting the local school funding. And so there's a federal law that addresses that to say this is how the federal government's going to compensate for that issue, just as Dr. Kincaid was saying, reimbursing and essentially contributing as other community members do in supporting the local school district's operations. So let's talk about what we mean by being federally connected. So as Dr. Kincaid was saying, we look at, is the student living on federal property? So the majority of those is Fort Wainwright and Eielson. Is one of the parents uniformed services member? So Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, etc. Right? And does the parent or guardian work on federal property? And that's broader, as Mr. Prax was mentioning, such as Bureau of Land Management on University Avenue, the federal building that you mentioned. It's got Social Security office in there. I think Fish and Wildlife in there. Bureau of Indian Affairs offices are in that large building. And so did you know that if a student has a civilian parent and they work on one of these federal properties that I just mentioned, Bureau of Land Management, for example, then that student is still considered federally connected. And when the district reports on that, we do receive some funds for those. This, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it goes into all these different categories of those three questions. So like, for example, if a student resides on federal property, like they live on Fort Wainwright, parent is a U.S. uniformed services member, they are Army, then they're in category B, and there's this weighting of 1.0. There's different weights for different students. There's a whole funding formula behind that, but it's all based on those three questions. Where does the student live? Where does the parent work? And is the parent a uniformed services member? So let's go into more detail about federal properties. So how do we determine that? So if for the majority of cases, it has to not be subject to federal taxation and has to be owned by the United States or it's leased by the United States from another entity, so they might have an office that they're leasing from someone. Indian land is included, okay, or federal low rent housing. Okay, so I have some little details on that of Indian lands. I'm talking about held in trust, restricted, Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act lands. Federal funding is a little more specific. It's the U.S. Housing Act of 1937. It's the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 1996. That's specific low rent housing, not all low rent housing counts. It's essentially federally funded. Okay. So let's continue on. There is an exception where a property could be paying taxes. There's a special clause in the impact aid law that says if there's a non-federal entity leasing from the U.S. government and they don't actually own that property, then it can be included. And this was, some research that we did with the help of Dr. Kincaid, Georgia over here, where Birchwood Homes is this area on Fort Wainwright. It's technically located on Fort Wainwright, even though civilians live there. And Birchwood Homes is the entity that's providing that service. They don't own the property. The property is owned by the U.S. government. They have a lease that's signed by the Secretary of the Army. I think it's 10 to 20 year leases, something like that. So students that live on that property can still be considered to be living on federal property. That's a special clause that I found in the impact aid law. Now, based on all this I said, so we got Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act land, Fort Wainwright, Ben Eielson, federal office building, Bureau of Land Management. We actually got a lot of land around the borough. It's about a third. It's actually more than that. I just have to keep looking and finding more and more and more. It's quite substantial in this borough. And this is all land that our borough cannot collect property taxes on. So it restricts their ability to provide services across the borough. So here's some more examples specifically. So Tanana and Ladd Elementary, they're technically on Fort Wainwright property. Arctic Light and Anderson Crawford. Here's another example, Federal Aviation Administration. They've got towers, they've got offices, right? Bureau of Indian Affairs. NASA has some research stations. Any business located on Fort Wainwright, even in the instance that they're kind of independent and these are civilians working there, like it's a restaurant or it's a hotel, at the most they're leasing from the US government. They don't own that property. So all of those will be included. Okay. So in general, a substantial portion of our students are federally connected, as just Dr. Kincaid was talking about. So they're either connected through parent being military or the parent is working on any one of these properties. And recently, because of this work and the help of Dr. Kincaid, Georgia Sanger over here, and our other school liaison officer with Fort Wainwright, Janet, yes, and Ferris, we have increased the number of students that we've been able to identify. And that was the help of the advocacy of these folks, because they're the experts on this and they help me kind of research and understand it and learn it, and saying, else we're not even close to our real count here. And we need to work on that and clarify that. And we have established a substantial increase. It's over 1,000 student increase based on the work that we've done. So instead of 25%, it's actually a third. 1 in 3 kids is very connected in those.
And yeah, I suppose you can take the fifth on this one, but you say we're not claiming as many as are probably out there. Is that fair to say?
I would not be surprised with that. Yeah.
Okay. How do we fix that?
Long process.
Mhm.
I've already worked on as much as I have. First thing was figuring out what are all the actual federal properties.
Mhm.
So when I first started, I'm calling all sorts of different people, talking to school liaison officers, our military support coordinator. I'm calling the federal government impact aid office and saying, what is a federal property? What are the federal properties in my borough? And they said, well, I don't have a list. Just turn it in. I'm like, I need more help than that,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I honestly had to read the law, do lots of research and lots of questions like, oh, that building over there, I think that's a federal building, just kind of figuring that out. And as well as at one point, we did put out a survey for parents to provide for us information because I thought we didn't have everyone.
Mhm.
And I opened it up and said, if you know of any other properties, let us know. And some folks did turn in some of those that gave me some more ideas about places. So some folks referenced Tanana Chiefs Conference and working at the Chief Andrew Isaac Health Center and Chief Peter John Tribal Building. And so I'm doing active research on that and trying to provide documentation and argument around those being considered federal properties. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
I went down to the borough
Yes.
because I thought that would be the first place to look. And they said, talk to Dr. Hawkins.
Yeah, I would say they were extremely helpful in the sense that there's a borough property search database.
Right.
You go on there and you see a map, you can go like, if I'm just like, oh, there's this building, I look at it, totally looks like a federal building because it looks,
Mhm.
it just has a certain look to it, right?
Mhm.
And I'll go click on it, I'll look at it, open it up, and I'll look at, is it taxed or not? Why is it not taxed or not? And they also have a tax roll that tells you here are the properties, here are these properties that are federal properties, or it'll say something like federal exempt from taxes. So basically, I'm researching on their information that they're providing in their website.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't sell them short in that sense. I would say that they were very helpful in that regard because I wouldn't be able to go down the roads that I did without them providing that and that search database to do that.
Hmm.
Yeah. But at the same time, I'm finding things and doing a lot of work and finding more things as I go. And the idea being that we want to make sure that every student is accounted for, to make sure that we get the the support that we need for these groups of students.
Mhm. And I suppose politicians, when they go out and talk to people, could emphasize this more.
Policy wise, it'd be very effective here with a policy that said you should fill out this survey
Mhm.
or identify your status instead of saying just military status, actually your federal connected status.
Mhm.
If you do that when you're doing enrollment, then we have a much easier time
Time
figuring
with
out
that.
who is.
Yeah.
Then we could verify if you actually are military connected or impact aid connected at all. That would be your first thing. So it needs to be put in policy that this is not an option. Because it
Mhm.
doesn't invade anyone's privacy
Mhm.
at all. We just need to
Right.
identify who you are to see where funding is available for
Right.
your education.
And we keep it completely confidential. It's only for the federal reporting purposes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
So the next sections are about the deduction of state aid. So Alaska is unique in this respect. In the federal impact aid law, there is a large section that talks about how if a state can prove that effectively it has equalization, either spending or revenue, and they do it through a disparity test. Try not to get in too much of the weeds of that, but it is a complicated calculation that's done. It's either your spending per student or your revenue per student. You figure it out for every district across the state, rank all the districts, right? Sort them, take your top 5% of student counts, remove it, bottom 5% remove it, and look at the top and bottom district when you're done. And look at the difference in those numbers. And if the difference is greater than 25%, you fail the disparity test. If you pass the disparity test, then the state of Alaska is allowed to effectively count a portion of impact aid as part of the equalization funding formula program. So what they'll do is it reduces the bill for the state.
Mhm.
But the districts are gonna get less funding from that. So, regardless of whether the state passed that disparity test, school district still gets the same amount of impact aid. It's simply the methodology of sending out state aid. State aid is based on, there's a funding formula, many of you might be familiar, there's a huge component of it called the base student allocation. That funding formula, it's figured out, and there's a special component where you subtract out a minimum local contribution. And then the next thing you subtract out is this proportion of impact aid that I referenced. The Fairbanks North Star, go to the next slide before I get to this. Like I said, Alaska is unique. Alaska is the last state that's using this provision. And it's about $80 million. That's the reduced state bill statewide. So in that sense, I talked to Mr. Prax about this. I said that, you know, when I'm doing my work and I'm trying to find more students, when I find more students, revenue goes up for our district from federal impact aid. If the state passes their disparity test, right? For our district, it's around 60%, 60 cents on the door. So for simplicity, let's say I found enough students to get an extra $1 million, let's say, in 1 year. The state's bill goes down by 600,000 when I do that. And so what I was talking to Mr. Prax about was, is there efforts on the state side of things to provide additional support for districts? Because not every district has someone like me that has time to go out and research all the federal properties, because it was quite clear to me that the U.S. Department of Education Impact Aid Office was like, we don't have a list. We're not going to tell you which places fit. You turn it in and then we'll say yes or no. And so I was like, that's kind of a, I wish, because imagine how much time they would have saved me if they said it's these 20 properties, right? So I was suggesting that if there was an individual coordinator or something like that supporting the state, supporting the districts across the state, it would actually, I bet you that individual could pay for their own position by reducing the bill across the entire state, because I'm very, very suspicious that Fairbanks is not alone when it comes to undercounting federally connected students. So what I would say, Mr. Prax, is here's all the work that I've done, and I found 1,000 to 1,500 extra students. My concern is, what about the next district and the next district and all the districts across the state? That, you know, that's, yeah, anyway, so.
And I think a good point to mention is he gets charged under the account administration, which we all hate. But there is a reason for administration. And we just can't blame somebody without understanding why they're there and go from there.
Yeah, my latest efforts is essentially trying to justify my salary,
Sure.
right? So if I bring in revenue that far exceeds my own salary, then I feel like I've justified it substantially. Yeah. And I think that's the end of our slides essentially. So the disparity test, if the state passes that, it can deduct that amount. It's about $80 million worth statewide. So it's a critical amount. And some of you may have heard that the state has recently failed the disparity test using the FY24 data, which is for the upcoming FY26 fiscal year. They've recently submitted an appeal. They have not failed the disparity test ever, to my knowledge. And certainly some have had questions around what would really happen. And I guess this would be a question for Mr. Pratt of what would really happen, you know. The way it works is the impact aid should not be changed. What would change is whether or not the state can deduct certain portions of it. And would you guys go into special session or something to try and deal with this extra unexpected amount, or?
We should. Will we? I don't know. It's becoming a big deal. The whole education thing is becoming a great big deal. And if it were me, I'd be happy to, because then we're we're totally focused on this. We're not focused on everything else. And then we should be able to figure it out. That's easier said than done, just reality. People have got other representatives have got more to do than I do, and I appreciate that. And it's reality. It's hard to do, but we should, yeah. And more importantly, we need to run that to ground, see what's going to happen, and not think about it the week after it happened.
Question.
Yeah, I just have a question. So from your presentation, it seems that the state of Alaska uses its impact aid to reduce its own burden in terms of paying
Yes.
for the general education fund. And that's the only state to do that. So
Yes.
other states, they meet their obligation to fund education. And then when they receive the federal impact aid, that is able to be sort of more of a supplement
Yep.
to the normal education expenses.
Right.
Yes.
Very good point. I haven't been able to run that to ground, but that does need to be run to ground unless you know the answer of why we chose to do that. And you wouldn't necessarily know that because that
I wouldn't
happened
know.
a long
It
time.
happened a
I would
very
only
long time
guess.
ago.
Yeah.
And it's not a governor specific. It happened in Alaska a long time ago.
Yep.
And each governor has done it that way. No one has opted not to do that. And I think the last state that did it
New
was New Mexico.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And there was a whole lot of advocacy from military side of the house of why are we doing it this way until they finally said, okay, we don't do this anymore. And we'll just put the money where it's earned.
You should ask your representative, run that to ground. Yes.
I just want to be crystal clear. So Dr. Meyer gets it, impact aid check, or the CFO, and then he's got to do what with it? What's he do with that impact aid?
It basically goes into the large general fund pot to
Right.
cover expenses.
But he's got to get it also to deed, right? 60%.
Think of it as independently. So whether a disparity test is passed or not, we get the same amount of impact aid. In fact, the impact aid office will say there's no skin in the game for them in the sense that their bill doesn't go down, their bill doesn't go up either way with the disparity test up or down. It affects the state aid component of it. The state can no longer say, I'll take basic need, I'll subtract local contribution, I'll subtract portion of impact aid. Oh, wait, I failed the disparity test. I can't subtract that anymore. So now I owe the school districts that difference. Fairbanks, they would owe us an additional $9 million in FY26. Over 9 million.
Mhm.
And there's been a lot of conjecture on what would happen because it's unprecedented. That's why I was asking Mr.
Right.
Rax, like, if that came in your lap, and who knows if it would, because the appeals process, I don't know enough about legal components of, they've never failed the appeal. They've had one instance where there was an appeal in, I think it was FY21 or somewhere around there. They won that appeal.
Mhm.
What is the next step after if they fail in this appeal?
Mhm.
And I don't know the processes and how long that process goes. Will that process theoretically go long past FY26? I don't know. But that's sort of those the unknowns component of it. Or is it a literal, like, you even if state law says you're going to run it this way, you're now conflicting federal law because you haven't passed the disparity test. And will it just be simply you now owe the school districts this difference, and then the legislature has to weigh, do we step into a special session? And you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. Or just, I don't know. I don't know how you would respond to such a thing, to say, because it would be a lot of money. It'd be $80 million that the state would have to solve.
Mhm.
And it wouldn't, and I want to clarify something, because I've read a lot of articles and whatnot, and they keep saying there will be a loss of funding. There will not be a loss of funding. What happens is the state's bill goes up.
Mhm.
They owe more money to the districts is what would happen.
Mhm. So the Department of Education did go through this drill in 23, I think it was, I don't
Okay.
remember, but anyway. If you think filling out your income tax form is complicated, try filling out the disparity test form. But anyway,
Yeah.
they just found some miscommunication, and eventually the state passed the disparity test. That took quite a few months. I want to say we're near 6 months.
Yeah.
So the question of the special session, no, we won't, because we won't know
The
We'll be
problem with
back
this
in
one, yeah,
January
you won't know
when- when this is resolved, and then. Boy, that'd be, another big debate, but it would be a supplemental appropriation. Hey, I guess I wouldn't get too concerned about this today or tomorrow. Let's wait and see what happens, but do make sure that you stay on your representative so that he does get the answer, or a better answer than what I can give you right now.
And so just to be clear, if, since Alaska is basically kind of, so to speak, the only state that's trying to pass the disparity test. We're in a really unique position, and if, Alaska state funding was adequate, then we wouldn't need to worry about, like, if Alaska said. We're going to fully fund education according to the funding formula and not rely on impact aid to reach like each basic student need. Then it wouldn't be an issue at all. We would receive the impact aid and be able to distribute it because the state was meeting their own burden by not trying to count the impact aid towards the state's obligation to fully fund education.
Yes and no. Yes, if we were, and the other question I have to run to ground is. Why are we still doing this when everybody else is doing something else? I think I have, my hunch is that the federal buildings and facilities are pretty well concentrated in the Fairbanks North Star Borough and the municipality of Anchorage. And the
Kodiak.
other
In Kodiak.
Kodiak, yes, but I'll bet what I'm going to find out is that the other smaller villages. And so they chose to do this so that we can increase the overall money for education in this case. Because there is some limit to the ability of the state to appropriate money. So we got to take it from somewhere else to give it to education. I think that's the answer, but hold on that. Let me go get the right answer.
Yeah, with the disparity test, assume for a moment that the intention is to maintain passing and
Mhm.
make an effort to passing. And I know there's a current regulation being considered, well, Alaska Administrative Code with the Alaska Department of Education and the state board reviewing that, and it's under public comment at this time. And that's really just what that seems to be only addressing is the ceiling part.
Mhm.
That's the when a borough contributes all the way up to the maximum, and then what counts towards this local contribution, and essentially the regulation trying to make sure everything that's contributed to be included, because there's some boroughs that are contributing to the maximum. That's not our borough; they're not contributing to the maximum, and that seems like a kind of a taking the ceiling and pushing it down. And what I was wondering about is what is either the State Department or the legislature doing to try to take the bottom up, because the disparity test is a disparity between the low and the top.
Mhm.
How do you bring the bottom up? Because I've noticed that 9 of the 10 in the latest disparity test, at the bottom, the lowest revenue per student districts are unincorporated boroughs.
Mhm.
And even though they're able to use, like I was talking about, they're able to use Indian lands for determining federally connected students. 90% of that, 90% is reduced from state aid, so that replacement isn't really done. And I'm also wondering, many of those districts might, not have tons of staff to be able to do extent, like me, I don't understand full real estate language, right? Because I'm reading along and it all talks about, well, the fee simple insert fund, and now I gotta look at that. What does that mean?
Mhm.
It also makes me wonder if a state level person or someone that has studied real estate and understands it fully well could really help the state if the intention was to continue trying to pass the disparity test, and that would be, I would think, viewed favorably if there was help bringing these districts that have lower revenue per student up using, more impact aid.
Mhm.
And especially when state benefits more than the districts did. That's what has been the confusing thing to me is like, I don't understand why the state's not like, can I help you with this? Because we benefit more, as in the state benefit more than our districts do when more impact aid money is found. By identifying students and figuring out, that's actually a federal property. Oh, wait, really it is? Yes, it is actually a federal property. That would be very useful
Mhm.
to us to get that kind of support.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's given me an interesting project. We are starting to run out of time. We did want to talk about accountability. If there were no other questions about.
We have I just wanted, you did have a person with your hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yep, sorry. And I can't see.
Hi,
Teresa.
Oh, Teresa.
thank you.
Oh, okay.
Actually, my question is at the school level, how can we help you to identify those students? Because we actually in our student information system are not currently counting our contractors as military connected. So how can we do that? And can we have a list of those things that you talked about in your PowerPoint so that we can more carefully identify for those students in the student information system?
Mhm.
Interesting. We should probably just talk more later.
Yeah.
If you essentially sounds like you have information I don't have. And yes, anybody that's contracting, like working on Fort Wainwright, their children would be considered federally connected. So, yeah, let's chat more later.
Yeah, and it will take some talking.
Yeah.
Probably.
Establishing process, yes, yeah.
Because that's. Disclosing information is not something Alaskans like to do. Yeah.
In surveys in general, when you send a survey
Yep.
out, you're happy when you get 20% back. And I even contacted other school districts that are similar size. There was an individual, and that individual, same size school district, said, I do nothing but impact aid. They
Mhm.
do it year round. That is their job. They're the impact aid coordinator or something for their district. And their district does a survey every single year. And I said, well, how many parents respond to that? And they said 95%. I said, whoa, how do you do that? We have a different challenge in our district of kind of reviewing how we raise awareness across our borough about the need for parents to share that information for us, and also that we would keep it confidential. It's only for federal reporting purposes and for supporting the school district.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I had a question in the last week, Scratch, you were talking about really needing to see data that reflected the gains in academics in our school. Has this Dr. Ott walked you through on how to access that on the Department of Ed's website?
Yes, sort of has. And then
There's
Who was with
what
us?
you're talking about is,
Oh.
well, not all, but there's a lot of information
Yeah.
there that would be really helpful to reflect the gains that we're seeing.
Right.
Specifically, like we talked last week about the Alaska Reads Act, but also, again, though, how to support those growths is through funding to keep classroom sizes and all that. But I just
Yep.
want to make sure that you had access to that site.
Yep, and I had some training, was it Wednesday? A very nice person came by that helped me. Might not have been you, I was thinking that it's not,
No, West
somebody who looks like you came by.
It's on West Valley, actually.
Yes.
Her name's, can't think of her, but yeah, she's from West Valley.
Yes, that's gonna take some
Yeah.
practice, but yes, if we could transfer or transition to that subject, that would really be helpful.
Do we want to open up the other PowerPoint? We have an assessment PowerPoint. I could talk about that. So while they're getting that set up, last school, well, every school year, just about, I provide an assessment report and or achievement report to our local school board. And I have a personal philosophy of complete transparency, like cards on the table, so to speak. That performance of students in every metric that would be relevant to evaluating success of students needs to be available. And I showed Mr. Prox our school district's data dashboard that I developed. It shows enrollment data all the way back to 2003. And you can look at enrollment data for every school, for economically disadvantaged students by all kinds of demographics, by grade level, et cetera. And I've got several different dashboards for different topics. There's a school climate one, where we ask parents what they think of their schools, ask students what they think of their schools, staff what they think of their schools. We ran that for 7 years. I've got one on graduation rates. We got several of them on different assessments. One of them is in connection with the Alaska Reads Act. And that is referred to as the M class. Some may be familiar with it as the Dibbles. I think it's like 8th or 9th edition, something like that. And dropout rate. And I'm always developing new ones. The next one potentially will be a post-secondary one where it shows students' graduation rates from college with at least an associate's degree or higher. That will be my next one. That's a big project to get that one done, and I think it'll be over 10 years and stuff. And that one will also look at the Alaska Performance Scholarship, which, you know, thanks to representatives like Mr. Prax and our legislature, they updated the Alaska Performance Scholarship recently. It was last year. Over the summer last year, I worked diligently because it was made effective, I think, as of June 30th of 2024. So it updated that group of kids that had just graduated. So I turned around and updated our student. And I think close to, I'm trying to remember the number, close to 60% of our students qualified for that scholarship.
So I'm a counselor in Ripple High School, and I will say it greatly increased the number of students that were able to qualify.
Yeah.
And the fact that it covers not only, you know, your traditional University of Alaska Fairbanks, Anchorage, all that, but it also covers those career and technical education programs. So they can go to UAS CTC and get their diesel technician certification, an associate's degree, and have that paid for. So it's just encouraging that continuing education, be it the traditional four-year college or something else. But yeah, you have a lot more students, and it was lovely too to watch kids realize that how much closer they were than they had originally thought. So.
Yes, one component of that update to that law was the inclusion of a kind of a CTE pathway, where if students has a lot of CTE coursework, they can qualify for Alaska Performance Scholarship through one of those pathways. Yeah.
So where do we find the performance measures that the Fairbanks North Star Borough uses to evaluate itself and individual schools?
So we were just talking about the data dashboard. So there's, like, for example, the Alaska Star. So you can look at the Alaska Star results. And usually whenever I can, I try to provide comparison results. And often I'll include Anchorage, Matsu, Kenai, and Juneau because they're similarly sized school districts. Is I want us to be able to do relatively close apples to apples type comparisons. And, you know, whenever we have national results, I absolutely want to provide those when those are available. Unfortunately, Alaska Star is contained within Alaska. So we're not able to say, what if every student in the nation took the AK Star? Now, NWA did an analysis to figure that out because they had some students taking two different assessments, which one was an assessment that had national percentile results, and the AK Star. And they were able to show that if a student, if you wanted a student to be highly likely to meet the AK Star, they had to be about the 80th percentile or so. And so essentially, if every student in the nation took the AK Star, about 20 to 30% would be proficient on that. And so the reason why that's important is it helps us get a sense of, you know, what's a high number, what's a low number, what's a medium number, what's an average number. Because the percentages alone won't tell us that. So I'll give you an example of that. In baseball, if you bought a team and someone's offering you a new player, one of the measurements you might want to use is a batting average.
Mhm.
And say that someone brought that person in and said their batting average is 50%. If you're thinking in terms of just percentages and say 50% sounds bad, that sounds bad, doesn't it? 50% is great
Mhm.
for a batting average. The only way we know that is by comparison. How do people in the entire league do? How do people do in a particular team do? And things like that. That's how we know what a particular measure is and how strong it is or how weak it is. And so that's why I'm saying it's important to have comparisons with other districts. So on the dashboards, I'll show that. There's also a statewide accountability system. And it's per the No Child Left Behind Act, which got reauthorized as the Every Student Succeeds Act. Our state writes a plan to do that. And I would say the two central components for that are achievement and growth.
Mhm.
So achievement and growth are really critical for accountability, especially with evaluating education. Because if you have a teacher work with one group of students, and let's say most of them are low achievers, right? Or the teacher is given a large group of high achievers at the beginning of the year, let's say, then they will tend to have different performance by the end of the year. And so growth is an effort to say, can we get closer to the impact of the instruction, right? Because that's the purpose. What I would consider one of the major purposes of education is the actual instruction and how strong that instruction is. And we want to honor efforts where some students might have achievement that's low enough that an entire years of growth will not shift them from being non-proficient to proficient. And so growth measurements will tackle that. And that's been recognized nationwide with the Every Student Succeeds Act, where every state in the nation is incorporating in their state plans growth. And so anyways, there's a model. You can read through, anyone that's interested can go to the state's website, look at its state plan, look at its accountability system, look how it's measuring achievement, look how it's measuring growth. And it determines values. It's an index system. The challenge with that one, and I've told them this, I say, your index is hard to interpret,
Mhm.
right? So like a school might get a 40 on the index. And just like I was saying before, you don't know what that number means until you know how others have done on, on a 0 to 100 scale, 40 sounds not so great. It turns out 40 is actually pretty good on the accountability index that the state's using. And like I said, part of that has to do with the AK star assessment. As I said, students effectively have to be somewhere between the 70th to 80th percentile, have to be really high in performance to be proficient on that AK star. And so that ends up having that index score be a little bit lower on average statewide. It would be lower nationwide if the same accountability system was applied to all schools across the nation. So anyways, that is run across our state. Every school gets an index score. State figures out, I believe it's either the bottom 5% or the bottom 10%, and identifies that school as a school in comprehensive support and improvement. And there's federal funds that are used to support an improvement process for that building. So this is the direct operation of accountability. And our district only has a handful of schools that qualify for that usually. And there, one provision that I've said is a challenge for our state is that every school that has a graduation rate below 2/3 is on comprehensive support and improvement, regardless of the index value, regardless of the accountability system. And so the most of our schools across the entire state that qualify for CSI, the comprehensive support and improvement, are based on graduation rate.
Mhm.
And that's yet another challenge for our state and doing any comparisons between states, because each and every state has different requirements.
That's what I read.
Yes.
That's nuts. How does that happen? When I read through that summary thing that I forget, somebody sent it to me, but it comes from the Federal Department of Education. And each state has to develop a plan, but the Federal Department of Education doesn't approve the plan, or they don't compare one to another. So Alaska is down at the bottom statistically. We're always complaining about that we're 49th or 50th. It appeared from that, it means our standards are too high. Maybe. Do we need to look into that some more?
No, the standards are definitely high.
Yeah, and you want the standards high, by the way.
It's okay to have,
Yeah.
to have the standards be high. So like, for example, the batter, right?
Yep.
So we're not gonna say, well, that's a super challenging for this batter and it's not fair to the batter.
Right.
What I'm simply saying is when you're trying to assess how strong that batter is, you have to be aware of the challenges before them, right?
Yep.
So, if we're going to talk about the percentage of students that are proficient, it's relevant to know how high the standard is.
Right.
There are some other achievement reports that I do to my board, and I'll be doing these for them soon. And one of those is evaluating what do we consider success,
Mhm.
right? What is achievement? And achievement isn't just proficient on assessment, which I spent an entire hour speaking to a group of professionals at a data conference talking about what is proficiency, because when we shift from the No Child Left Behind to Every Student Succeeds Act, in that process, actually in the in-between, the race to the top, you're probably familiar with the race to the top, there was this effort to say, well, if you want additional funding, you have to come up with these agreements. And part of that agreement was the state needed to adopt a standard which required students to be college and career ready by the end of high school. And they said, oh, by the way, here are some standards that are already done. And it was the Common Core standards. And so I think it was over 40 states that adopted the Common Core. And I think it was just a path of least resistance kind of thing. Like essentially, it was already done. And you only have so much time and you got to turn it in and you want to be competitive and you want to get those funds, and vast majority of states adopted it. And there were a few that said they didn't adopt it, like Alaska, which really just took the language of the Common Core and made small edits to it. So our standards are actually still the Common Core standards effectively with a few changes to it. So when that happened, nationwide, the percent of students that were proficient, we're still using the same term, even though we changed the standards. It went down nationwide. And I would say what's relevant to know about that is in the event that achievement itself didn't change at all, the percentages changed. Right. So that's the problem that happens when standards shift back and forth, is it becomes difficult to figure out, well, how well are we really doing? Right. That's why I say you need to do comparisons, let's say within a state, between nation, and the reference to performance being low for our state is only a state level result. That's from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's on fourth grade in particular. For eighth grade, it was not the case pretty recently, since 2015. Unfortunately, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, our district has no way of evaluating it because no student gets a NAEP result. No teacher gets a NAEP result for their class. No school gets a NAEP result for their school. No district in our entire state gets a result for the NAEP. We just have it statewide. So the challenge for our community, and that's why I try to provide alternate measures, because we don't have NAEP. We just don't. Those are not provided to us. Not enough of our students take the assessment. There's not enough sampling effectively to be able to say how our Fairbanks students is doing. So I'll use alternate measures that we do have that do provide national ranking, which our district tends to perform at the national average and not at the bottom. Is that those NAEP results are for the state and not for Fairbanks
Mhm.
and not for a North Pole area. So that's my major concern with that is that we can talk about results for the NAEP for Alaska, but my concern is about if there's any representative for our borough and our borough area, North Pole area, all those areas, my question for them would be, how is our community doing?
Right.
Right? And the NAEP doesn't tell you that, but it won't tell you.
But some of the other assessments will.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we have those available. It's in my data dashboard.
Mhm.
You can look at it, you can see, we're close to the national average. When you're measuring growth, we're at or above average. And all that data is available. Anyone here is more than welcome to look at the website, look at the data dashboard and ask me questions, contact me about that.
Well, I have a quick one. So the state doesn't make it mandatory to take the the AQ Star. It's optional. Parents cannot, well, you have to opt out of it, but it's, in your opinion, Dr. Ott, how do you feel that probably skews the results specifically to the Fairbanks North Borough? And I'll say from my experience at the high school level, some of our highest achieving students are the ones that are opting out.
Mhm.
They are the ones most of the time too who have parents who are a little bit more involved, who are going to be signing that paperwork, calling the school, going through that process. So when we want to talk about, like low scores or high scores, how does that skew if it's not mandatory to take the assessments? And it's not mandatory for any, homeschool students, private school student, private school students don't probably do it anyways, but
Yeah, it's a good point to bring up. So automatically, I think it's a reasonable thing to question and wonder about and be concerned about is which students are choosing not to test, right? Or not testing, right? And so when I have results for a particular year, what I'll try to do is try to look at maybe past results for a student if I have it. The problem is sometimes they may consistently not test. So effectively what you're trying to do is to look at the group of kids that didn't test, are they different on average? Like if they're a group of high achievers, it would reduce the results for the groups of students that did test. And so I have to pretty much analyze that every year. And it's an even stronger challenge for our correspondence programs because our test taking rate's substantially lower. And that's a statewide problem. That's I meet in the State Department and they're challenged with that. How do we improve that participation rate? Yeah, that's what we're talking about when I say participation rate. That's the students testing. Yeah.
you're not required, if there's not mandatory testing, how can we be truly assured that those students are at an academic level that they should be? That without mandatory testing, you are taking everybody's word for it. And yes, there are people that are honest out there, but there are also people that are have gamed the system.
Yep.
And so I was homeschooled. From kindergarten to I graduated from IDEA homeschool. But when I was in school, state testing was mandatory. And it was the benchmarks. Benchmark, you had to take benchmarks.
Yep.
And as we've seen that go away, I'll say that too, that because of that lack of accountability for parents with homeschooling, when they come back to the public school system, oftentimes we're the ones that take the heat for not getting those students up to par.
Yep.
We're the ones that are at the school level, the parents are, why is my child failing? Well, we have no history of your child's academic achievement.
Right.
So we can't decide too, it makes it hard to determine if that student has learning disability, anything like that. And so for me, I believe that mandatory testing would improve our ability to better serve students because we can have a history versus there's 4 years that they don't test and they test 1 year. If they go to public school, suddenly they test and then they go back to homeschool. How can we be sure what that goes?
Tricky question. correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand the federal Title I, maybe it's not one, but within that group of statutes or whatever those things are called at the federal level, the state cannot mandate testing. That must have been a recent change. I don't know.
It may be,
Am I-
yeah, I don't know about federal law, it's always been a conundrum for me.
Yep.
You know, because the federal law is essentially saying you are held accountable for having 95% or
Yep.
more tested. Right?
Yes.
But there's this inherent or implied, choice in there of,
Mhm.
well, what are you gonna do if I don't test? Kind of thing. And are you gonna, mandate and force a student to test? And it's more explicit in state law, but it's an interesting question of does the Every Student Succeeds Act explicitly state the requirements of the parent and or the student when it comes to assessment? And most of it is just in particular about the actions of the state.
State. Yes.
And writing a plan and writing a, if they're under 95%,
Yep.
what kind of plan are you gonna write for the schools that are under 95%? And our State Department is struggling with, or challenged with, the low participation rate of our correspondence programs in general.
Yep.
Across the state. It's not just, it definitely includes our correspondence program and other correspondence programs where the challenge is testing for sure.
Mhm. Or some other agreed upon method. I'm not a big fan of forcing anybody to do anything. So what we got to think about first is how can we make this attractive enough that parents see the value in it and then they will test. We sent our 2 children through the IDEA program explicitly, and the only thing we got out of it was the testing. That's all we wanted. But we wanted somebody to hold us accountable for that. And I would think it would blow me away if parents don't want that. But sure enough, they don't.
They want the money.
Well, yeah, but the other side of it is, oh, well, here I am
Yeah.
in the legislature and you want me to pay for it, is that correct? Yep. Oh, I want to make sure I'm getting something for that. And then we should have, it would seem to me reasonable, but politically, that is going to be a challenge, and we've got to get together and talk with each other and understand each other's points of view and come to some sort of a voluntary agreement. And then that we are comparing apples to apples. If we want to compare Anchorage to Fairbanks, North Pole to Fairbanks, West Valley to Lathrop, everybody to the home schools, we better agree on, yep, this is a fair way to do it. And that is going to be the standard challenge.
Question for Dr. Off. So in terms of like other ways to measure student growth that aren't based on a standardized test, because not everybody is good at a standardized test.
Yep.
Are there other ways of measuring student growth and sort of like education success that you've considered for our school district?
Okay, so that I will probably get into. So like, trying to remember the timing of this. At one point, the superintendent said, I'd like you to do a report on achievement for the board. And I said, well, achievement covers this, and that. Is that okay? He said, yes. And I created it and I said, and I provided, I provided it and said, I practiced it and said it takes over an hour to cover it.
Mhm.
And he said, let's split it up. Okay, so that's where came the achievement series. So it was originally a single report, but I wanted to cover kind of all the bases. Because achievement is a lot broader than the assessment, like you're saying. Assessment performance, especially when you've got individuals that, let's say you have a kid that's in 11th or 12th grade. You're gonna have to go back a few years before you even can see assessment results for that student. How do you evaluate their success? Also, we haven't really talked a lot in our district until recently when I started presenting on it, is grades that are issued by teachers, right? A, B, C, D, F, most of us are familiar with that. How do those correlate with other achievements, right? How does the assessment results correlate with other achievements? When we talk about achievement, I'll give you another example, graduating from high school, that's an achievement, right?
Mhm.
So imagine you have a family and they have two documents, so to speak. One document says AK star below proficient. The other document says they have a diploma. And my question would be, which one's more important
Mhm.
to the family, right? And I'm just using that scenario to talk about there are other achievements that are of value to consider, other measures, right? So that's why I have things like a graduation rate dashboard that shows our graduation rate for our students. We see that improving, so that's something that I think I'm certainly supported with our superintendent and our board. It was tracking that. And as well as that, of this idea of being in the nation with Every Student Seats Act of students completing high school and being college and or career ready, right? My challenge with that is you don't measure that with an assessment. The idea of the assessment is it's supposed to just kind of measure whether or not they're on track for that. But as we get better at collection of data, so to speak, and I would say, do they graduate? Period, from college, and or do they? I liked a lot when I think it was either superintendent or administrator from Delta said, we review, do they enroll, do they enlist, or are they employed? Right, the 3 E's is what they called it, and I thought that's a critical thing to think about of what is achievement for a student, what is an accomplishment for students that we want them to have. And the challenge with the assessment, we just talked about it, not all the students are even testing. So there's limitations with the assessment, not only with being able to interpret what proficiency even means. Like I said, its standard is high and I will maintain that. 70th percentile, 80th percentile, it's very high, meaning lower proportions of students will pass that than students that are getting 3.0 GPA, right? So you might have a family who has a 3.5 GPA and then they get this assessment result that says they're not proficient. And how does a family evaluate how the student is doing? And that's where I would say you need to evaluate all of your measures to assess how the student is doing. And I've done analysis on the GPAs. I've looked at, ASA has a requirement, I think it's 2.0 or higher to participate in those activities. I looked at, well, what's our performance and graduation rate for those students? And graduation rate is 90%, something like that. I want to go further and start looking at their college enrollment, college graduation. If I had employment data, I would do that. I think that's a little bit on the privacy side of things. I do believe the latest, didn't HB 57 have a component in it where the State Department and Department of Labor would do something like that?
That went over like a lead balloon too, but it's in there.
It's in there. Okay, it is in there. So does that kind of answer it? That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Do they graduate high school or not?
Yeah.
What do they do after that? What is their post-secondary, can I collect everything? No, but I can at least know, do they attend college? Do they graduate from college? I'd like to know more, of course, that's not the only success.
I just have another, just a little, it's almost like a follow-up, but it's more like a.
Just a follow-up question, and I want to just make a few comments. Go ahead, go ahead with your question.
She also had her hand up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
We're gonna get to that. Go ahead, go finish your
Well,
question.
it's just, it like, is attendance a precursor to all of these measures of achievement? I guess that's one of the things I was just thinking about in terms of like our school district and student attendance rates. If that could be a potential other measure of achievement and predictor of success.
Yeah, so in every one of, I think it's in all of them. It might be in all of them, in most of them it is. There's going to be a little thing you can click on where it says regular attendance. And I define that as 90% or higher. Essentially, I think it's going to be really challenging to have strong likelihood of achievement or success when the student doesn't have at least regular attendance, 90% or higher. And so there'll be little measures that'll say, you click on that, it'll say regular attendance versus not, and you'll see differences in graduation rates and assessment performance and all that.
So just on the topic of achievement and a little bit on attendance, And just from hearing last week when you were talking about wanting to hear maybe some positive numbers. I teach second grade and I have just a couple examples of student growth this year that I feel like is worth sharing. So in second grade, you do the M class, which is part of the AK reads and the whole state thing. And what we're really focused on, there's lots of different parts of that testing, but what we really focus on is fluency, which boils down to words read in a minute. And we have kind of national norms of like words per minute that we're sort of shooting for. So at the beginning of second grade, we're in this like 55-ish kind of is what we're 55 words or so, 60 words in a minute. So I had a student come in this year reading 14 words in September. That's scary, right? That's not anywhere near that 50th percentile. So we start doing all the things, the core instruction with our approved reading program, our walk to read, which is how we're approving kids to get those interventions. Because I teach a Title I school, that student had access to a Title I tutor. That student's parents jumped right on board for that AK Reads Act. We had that before school tutoring in the month of October. Parents jumped right into that. At Christmas time, he has a score of 29 words. So he's doubled. Fast forward, we keep all those supports in place. We get to the testing at the end of April. Let me just tell you, in December, the goal would be around 90. So he's doubled, but he's still significantly below that 50th percentile goal. We get to April, 50th percentile goal is like 106 words a minute. He's gotten to 98 words. So we've gone from 14 to 98. We've gone from significantly below to just within like arm's reach of that goal. And he had really consistent attendance. So I have another example, a student that read 34 words in September, got to 89, so below the goal, gets right to the goal mid-year, and then 118 at the end of the year, exceeds that goal. And that's with that walk to read, again, consistent attendance on top of everything teachers are doing just in the classroom for everyone.
Is that it? Tuk Brown?
That's correct.
Okay.
So then I can tell you two more. So I have a kiddo that started reading 105 words a minute. So that's really easy to just be like, he's fine, he's got it. But that's not okay because every kid needs to keep learning and we need to use that walk to read time for enrichment. So by mid-year, he's at 125 words. So exceeding, he hasn't flatlined, he hasn't regressed, he's continued to grow. And then at the end of the year, 142 words a minute. So really great growth. My one flatline example I want to share with you is this. This student started here reading 51 words. So just kind of right in that ballpark of where we want to be. Christmas at 74 words. Didn't quite make that growth. Then we dropped to 60 words at the end of the year. That's the one where my heart hurts because I don't want to see that. But that child had almost 60 absences. So this attendance piece is, we're showing that with all these things in place and with extra Title I supports and with the extra AK Reads, little bit of before school or after school, however your school did it, tutoring option in that month of October and month of January, like we can make really great games, but that attendance piece has to come into it.
Stands to reason. Yeah.
But there is really good growth happening.
Good. Good to hear.
This is a tremendously interesting discussion. And I would like to just keep going. But we do have to respect everybody else's time here tonight. So I do want to give everybody here who's in the room a chance, if you have something to say, give you one kind of last round to go at it in an attempt to wind this thing down. I'm here for the duration. I know we have two guests here that are here. We really appreciate their time being here too, and I don't want to take advantage of them because they may never come back. They said, never going back to that place again. They bring you there and tell you you're going to be there for an hour and keep you for 2 hours. I don't want to do that. I do not want to take advantage of anyone's time. So let's kind of just go around the room. Does anybody who is wanting to say something, has had a chance to say something?
Just a quick, for Mr. Potts, are you gonna show up at the beginning of this special session? Is he, I mean, yeah, no?
I haven't bought my plane ticket yet. I want to, but I need some sort of assurance that we're going to look into this more than just vote on the vetoes. Otherwise, it's a waste of your money and my time to go down there. So I'm planning to go down there. Making an effort to make that happen, but I haven't bought my plane ticket yet.
Anybody else? So, I want to really thank everyone who took the time to drop in tonight. Appreciate you joining us in our humble conditions here. We try hard and we do good work. We are limited with the equipment that we have that's been donated and that we've been able to scrounge up. But we do the best we can with what we have. Dr. K and Dr. Ott, I really appreciate both of you, gentlemen, taking the time to come visit with us and give us this information. Representative Cox, as usual, appreciate your regular attendance. Final last word, if anybody else wants one last word, this is your last chance. If not, I'm gonna ask our technician to end the meeting for everybody and we'll start converting the meeting to save it and we'll